While there really is a lot to be excited about when it comes to many of the changes proposed in the latest Unearthed Arcana playtest 6 for One D&D or D&D 24 or whatever we want to call it now, I kind of like D&D 24. Anyway, while there is a lot to like, there is this one trend that not only doesn't seem to want to disappear, but actually seems to be getting worse over time, and honestly, it really just needs to stop. These are the features that allow you to regain resources when you have none remaining. These features are just bad design. They're useless at best and beyond infuriating at worst. In their current implementation, they add next to nothing to the game and are a completely dead feature 99% of the time, and even in the optimal scenario where it all works out and you get to activate it, it's so underwhelming that you may as well not have had it to begin with. So let's talk about the design, what it's trying to do, and how it can be better implemented. By the way, if you enjoy my videos and would like to help support me, a sub to the channel would be extremely appreciated. I can't even begin to explain how much it helps. I'm also really hoping to hit 2,000 by the end of July, so thanks. I'm going to start off by discussing the poster child for this egregious attack on my fun by discussing the 2014 Bard's 20th level capstone feature, Superior Inspiration. I went on a bit of a mini rant about this in my recent video about the newly revised Bard, but here I want to go into a little bit more detail. I want to talk about what the design of this and features like this are trying to accomplish, and to be as fair as possible, I'm going to evaluate the feature itself in a vacuum, ignoring its 20th level constraint. The 2014 version of Superior Inspiration reads, at 20th level, I'm going to ignore that, when you roll initiative and have no uses of Bardic Inspiration left, you regain 1 use. In a vacuum and ignoring the level requirement, even I have to admit that this actually is not that bad of a feature. It can provide some useful utility in a moment where it might be critical and doesn't require you to actually spend anything on it. The design goals here are actually kind of admirable and are twofold. In theory, you are being rewarded for actually using your class features and resources, and are being granted some additional staying power for that as well. The problem here is that everything falls apart the second we leave the vacuum and consider this feature in reality. Superior Inspiration sitting at 20th level was a blunder of catastrophic proportions, and don't worry, I will also address the playtest 6 version of it as well. So why is it actually so bad then? Well, there are a few reasons. For one, by the time you've reached 20th level, your charisma modifier is going to be +5, which means you already have 5 uses of your inspiration dice per short rest as a result of Font of Inspiration. This situation is very likely not actually all that dissimilar to the exact same situation you were at 5th level when you first got Font of Inspiration. It's very likely that your 5th level bard also had a +5 charisma modifier, or maybe +4 at worst, so your reward for making it all the way to 20th level after potentially years of play is getting 1 or 2 additional uses of inspiration per day, sometimes, maybe. Let's talk about it. The purported increase in power that this feature brought was so far beyond inconsequential that I would argue that in many ways, it could be seen as a detriment to your character, as it can incentivize a way of play that may actively hurt you or your party in order to derive value from a feature that provides so little it makes you question your existence. In order for Superior Inspiration to work, you are being incentivized to dump your inspiration as soon as possible, just so that if you end up rolling initiative, you can get 1 use of it back, which you then have to hold onto and guard with your life, and use it at just the right moment so it then isn't wasted. This one feature, the 20th level Bard Capstone, encourages 2 styles of play that functionally oppose each other, and it makes absolutely no sense. I have to imagine that the reason Superior Inspiration and other features like it exist in the way they do is due to the fact that 5e, as written in the Dungeon Master's Guide, is balanced around the idea that characters will have between 6 and 8 medium or hard encounters per adventuring day, with at least 1 or 2 short rests thrown as well. This is something which may have been true at some point, and possibly even in older editions, but I've never run a single adventuring day with 6 combat encounters, let alone 8. I've never played an adventuring day that featured 6 combat encounters, and I've very seldom heard of anyone else doing this either. Now, that's not to say that it doesn't happen. I'm sure that there are plenty of players who have some amazing Diablo-esque style games where they dungeon crawl and annihilate hordes of enemies, and I'm sure that it is freaking awesome, but I would hazard a guess that the vast majority of players do not participate in campaigns that work this way. Also, if you spend any amount of time on Reddit or in YouTube comments or even listen to Jeremy Crawford himself, you'll quickly learn that there are a surprisingly large amount of tables that don't even utilize the short rest. Like, at all. The worst part of Superior Inspiration isn't even the disappointment that you feel when you realize that that's your reward for making it to 20th level, or even how aggressively bad it is when it does work. But rather, the worst part is that it feels like it was just designed without any attention paid to the way that most players are actually playing the game, and they've carried that design through now for nearly a decade, to the point where it's even making a resurgence in the last few Unearthed Arcanas for D&D 24. Not only does Superior Inspiration still exist in the latest playtest, but so do a host of other similar features. Druids get the Archdruid feature with Evergreen Wild Shape at 20th level, which reads, whenever you roll initiative and have no uses of Wild Shape left, you regain 1 use of it. Monks at 15th level gain Perfect Discipline, which allows them to regain 4 discipline points when they roll initiative if they have none remaining. The situation for the monk might even be worse than what we described for the bard, since inspiration is really just a small buff that you can pass on, but a monk relies on their ki or discipline points to actually do anything and be effective in combat. That situation where you're incentivized to just dump your discipline points only to get 4 back can lead to a situation where your monk just ends up dead. Superior Inspiration has been revived in playtest 6, where it is now an 18th level feature, and you now receive 2 uses of your Bardic Inspiration rather than just 1. Both of these things in isolation are good, don't get me wrong, but the feature is still horrendous for all of the same reasons we mentioned earlier, but it gets especially bad when you realize that it seems like they figured out a way to transpose this terrible design into an actually worthwhile feature, but then they still kept the bad versions around. The core flaw with these features isn't actually its existence, as I've kind of been joking about throughout. It's that it comes so late that its existence is more confusing than valuable. Like I mentioned earlier, in a vacuum, the feature is actually pretty good, and can be especially helpful to characters at lower level where you may be starved for resources. The thing is that there is a fundamental difference between having your monk just rip through all their discipline points for the sake of deriving value from perfect discipline, and just naturally using them because you just don't have a lot. This is largely what necessitated the creation of the new heightened metabolism feature for monk, but even at 7th level, that still comes much too late. As I alluded to earlier, it seems that the design team has actually figured out a way to make features like this work, and they seem to be experimenting with different versions of the concept at different levels and with different requirements. The new version of Font of Inspiration, for example, allows you, if you have no uses of your Bardic Inspiration, to give yourself 1 by expending a spell slot without the use of any action. This feature comes online at 5th level at the same time that the bard is able to regain all of their inspiration dice through a short rest. This is incredible design. The ability to regain 1 inspiration die on its own feels kinda lackluster, never mind gating it behind a 20th level feature. But tying it to another feature so it just feels like an extra little bonus and making it an interesting decision point where you need to determine what is best in the moment, an extra spell slot or an inspiration die, makes for something that can feel like a meaningful choice. And sure, yeah, in most cases the spell slot is probably still better, but not always. In the previous playtest, we saw barbarians gain a new 17th level feature, Rage Resurgence, which allows them to regain 1 expended use of their rage whenever they roll initiative. Notably, this lacks the requirement of needing to have no rages left, which is great, but again, it just comes at a point where it is pretty much completely unnecessary. At 17th level, a barbarian has 6 uses of rage and has access to both persistent rage and relentless rage. It just seems so extremely unlikely that a character at that level would be so desperate for just 1 additional use, and if they were, it's likely that that situation probably wouldn't be salvaged by a single use of rage anyway. One of the better implementations of this idea is a new 15th level sorcerer feature, Sorcerer's Restoration, which allows you to regain 4 sorcery points whenever you roll initiative or complete a short rest. Again, there is no requirement for you to have 0, but once again, it just arrives so late. Design-wise, I understand the very intricate balance that needs to exist between available resources and expending those resources. If you have access to a certain amount of sorcery points or spell slots or discipline points or inspiration or rages or wild shapes, it can get to a point where having a limit makes no sense. Why bother putting a limit on a functionally limitless resource? Resource management is a crucial part of the game. It's what can make for intense and interesting decision points and can allow for different players to play the same class in very different ways. All of these things are important aspects of designing game systems that depend on resources. However, equally important in systems design is allowing your players to effectively use those resources or skills or features that they do have. Some classes just kind of feel much more starved for resources than others. Warlock spell slots in the 2014 version of the class, monks with ki, and even sorcery points. All of these limitations imposed on their respective classes feel like much more of a symptom of poor design rather than one which is rewarding the player for thoughtful execution of their skills or spells. This isn't even just me kind of making things up either. In all the discussions with Jeremy Crawford about the revised Warlock, he mentioned that some of the biggest feedback they received about the class and what they noticed through their own observations was that because the Warlock had so few spell slots, players would just hoard them waiting for the perfect time to utilize them, which ultimately ended up in leaving them unspent. This results in a less than satisfactory experience for both the player and the class, and clearly demonstrates a situation where arbitrary resource deprivation is not only uninteresting, but also detrimental to the game overall. What I'm trying to say is that I understand why features like Superior Inspiration arrived so late. The designers were likely too afraid of giving players access to too many resources at early stages of the game, as they feared that it would trivialize the game. However, the reality is that most players simply aren't playing the game as the designers intended, so this results in many of their perceived balance issues not actually materializing. These features can actually be great if implemented well and at the correct time. It is great to see that the team is experimenting with providing additional resources in new and interesting ways, such as how the new Font of Inspiration works. Regeneration of class resources should be something that they continue to explore in future UAs, hopefully lowering the level requirement of most of the feats that currently do it, and dropping the requirement to have none remaining. If you enjoyed this video, consider leaving a like and subscribing to my channel, it really helps me a lot. Feel free to check out some of my other One D&D videos, and take care.